Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CMRITO webinar on what you must know about professional accountability. My name is Linda Gough, and I'm the Registrar and CEO at the CMRITO. It's a pleasure to be with you today to talk about this important professional responsibility for all medical radiation and imaging technologists. So first of all, what is professional accountability? Well, as you know, under the legislation, under the Regulated Health Professions Act and the Medical Radiation and Imaging Technology Act, CMRITO is accountable to regulate the practice of the profession to serve and protect the public interest. That's our mandate as it's set out in the legislation. And the way we do this, we ensure that only qualified MRITs are registered and able to practice in Ontario. And we make sure that they're practicing competently and safely throughout their career. Under the legislation, the college holds its members accountable for their practice and conduct and has processes to address issues or complaints related to incompetence, professional misconduct, and incapacity. It's an important part of professional regulation to be able to address issues related to members who are not accountable or who have committed an act of professional misconduct or they're incapacitated or incompetent. So what does this look like for MRITs? Well, you're accountable to make sure that you're practicing in accordance with lots of pieces of legislation. We got the RHPA and the MRIT Act, also the Healing Arts and Radiation Protection Act, the Healthcare Consent Act. There's lots and lots and lots of pieces of legislation. And of course, those are all set out in practice standard number 1, under the CMRITO standards of practice. You can also find information about the legislative framework in the college's online free jurisprudence course. So we have a program, also called a legislation learning package, that's available to members and applicants for free. You can find it on the website. You can also find it in your member and applicant portal or map through the QA program. So Ontario legislation, we work in a highly regulated profession, in a highly regulated environment. There's all kinds of layers of legislation at the workplace for practice, for taking care of patients, and of course for regulating the practice of the profession. So all this legislation, though, of course, has been created by government in order to protect the public. That ultimately is the purpose. It's complicated. Lots of different pieces of legislation, some fairly new, some very old, and they apply in different practice settings. So the legislation, of course, sets out MRIT's accountabilities. And what we try to do at CMRITO is to explain the legislation to you so that you understand the practice and also provide resources so that you're aware of the issues and you're able to comply with the legislation. And so that brings us to our new publication, What You Must Know About Professional Accountability. And what we've done is create a checklist of what you must do in order to make sure that you are meeting all your professional accountability requirements. And it's separated into 3 different groupings: what you must always do, what you must do once a year, and what you must do when the situation arises. So our what you must know about is available on the website. It's also been emailed to all members, and you can ask questions about it at practiceadvice@cmrito.org. Don't forget, we're always here to answer your questions that you might have related to professional practice issues and professional accountability. So let's get right to it. We have 17 steps around the professional accountability, and the first ones are related to what you must always do. So number one is adhere to the requirements set out in the legislation, the regulations, and other applicable laws. We've already talked about such an extensive number of laws that are all interrelated. What we are concerned about, of course, at CMRITO is the MRIT Act and the RHPA. And so we have legislation and standards of practice around the scope of practice, authorized acts, orders for diagnostic and therapeutic procedures. All these things have pieces of legislation associated with them. And of course, we just created a little while ago what you must know about performing procedures. So that has all the legislation that you need to be able to perform procedures safely and in compliance with the legislation. Number two is to adhere to the college's standards of practice. And that's because the CMRITO standards of practice are enforceable, and we'll get to that later on. But under the profession's standards of practice, MRITs are expected to be competent, accountable, and collaborative. And as you remember, the standards of practice have been developed by the college and circulated to members. The members had lots of comments and suggestions for the standards. So they really are developed by the profession, and they reflect the level of practice in order to ensure competent and safe practice for the public. Number three is adhere to the college's code of ethics. And this describes your ethical responsibilities to the public, patients, the profession, colleagues, and other health professionals. One of them, which I'm sure you all are aware of and do follow, is that MRITs must respect the dignity, privacy, and autonomy of their patients and treat all patients equitably, regardless of race, ancestry, gender expression, all the grounds in the for discrimination in the Ontario Human Rights Code. And I'm sure there's lots more. One of the things that you're able to do, of course, is to treat all patients with dignity, privacy, and autonomy, no matter their background or any of these other characteristics that are grounds for discrimination. Number four is adhere to the requirements set by the legislation, other applicable laws, and the standards of practice regarding consent, prevention of sexual abuse, and confidentiality and privacy. So, as you know, you must be able to provide, this is in the standards of practice, you must be able to provide appropriate responses to patient inquiries about procedures and related issues, and accept the patient's autonomy and the right of the patient to consent or refuse treatment. It's in the standards of practice. It's also explained in our What You Must Know About Healthcare Consent Act. And of course, the jurisprudence program, Module 7, is about consent. I'm sure all of your facilities have processes around consent. One of the important things to remember is that consent is a process. It's not just a signature on a form. And of course, the patient can withdraw consent verbally at any point in time. So it's one of those things you always have to be checking for. Prevention of sexual abuse. The college has a policy of zero tolerance of sexual abuse, and this means that any complaint or report of sexual abuse of a patient by a member will be investigated thoroughly by the college. MRITs must touch patients only in those areas needed to facilitate carrying out the procedure. and must explain clearly where and why they need to touch the patient. So that's something, again, that you do every single day. It's set out in the standards of practice, set out in the jurisprudence program, module 5, abuse prevention, and what you must know about communicating with patients and also sexual abuse. So lots of information and resources around this important requirement. Confidentiality and privacy. You must understand how and act to protect the confidentiality of all professionally acquired information about patients and the privacy of patients with respect to that information. Again, set out in the standards of practice and the jurisprudence program in module 6. I'm sure all your facilities have very comprehensive and robust policies around confidentiality and privacy. It's certainly an area that all healthcare facilities have been focused on in the last little while. And there's lots of resources too around this on the Ontario government websites. Number 5 is not to commit any acts of professional misconduct. So the RHPA, the MRIT Act, and the regulations provide the college with the authority and obligation to address concerns of professional misconduct, incompetence, or incapacity of members in order to protect the public from harm. That's the whole purpose of this. You can find out more information on this in the jurisprudence program, module 1. And what you must know about complaints and what you must know about professional misconduct. Our regulation sets out some of the grounds, or sets out a whole list of grounds for professional misconduct, but here's some of them. One of them is failing to maintain the standards of practice of the profession. When we say that the standards are enforceable, that's what we mean. If an individual is not able to maintain the standards of practice of the profession, that is professional misconduct, and we will investigate and the ICR committee, the Inquiries, Complaints and Reports Committee, will determine what to do about the members' lack of adherence to the standards of practice. So that's what we mean by saying that they're enforceable. Practicing the profession while the member's certificate of registration is suspended. We've done a lot of information recently about illegal practice. It is set out in the professional misconduct regulations as well. Here's one you might not know about: using a name other than your name as it's set out in the public register in the course of providing services within the scope of practice of the profession. So if you're working in your departments as an MRIT, you have to be using your name as it's set out in the register. And of course, we have another way of providing, because in the public register we have legal names, but we also have a section for other names that members may use in their practice. Practicing the profession while the member's ability to do so is impaired by any substance. I'm sure you would all agree that that is definitely grounds for professional misconduct. And failing to comply with a requirement or an order of the committee of the college. So the college's committees have authority under the legislation to issue orders to members after an investigation or as a result of an assessment of their QA portfolio. And failing to comply with a requirement or an order of a committee is grounds for professional misconduct. And if you have a look at our on our website at the discipline hearings, you'll see examples of members who have been found guilty of professional misconduct because they have not adhered or followed or complied with an order of a committee. Number 6 is to use only the protected titles and abbreviations appropriate to your specialty. And as you know, only CMRITO members who hold a current certificate of registration may use their specialty titles and abbreviations. And there they are, all 5 of them are listed there. If you resign your registration with the college, you're no longer able to use your protected title and abbreviations because it's an indication to the public of Ontario that you are registered and able to practice the profession legally at that point in time. Number 7 is to keep your registration with the CMRITO in good standing. This means paying your registration fees on time, but it also includes ensuring that the college has only accurate and complete information about you. So as you know, you're required to provide information to the college, and you need to make sure that that is accurate and complete, that the public register information is accurate and complete, that you've listed all your places of employment, all those public protection pieces. Any additional names that are used in practice are listed on the public register, and that you hold PLI in accordance with the college bylaw. So all these things contribute to making sure that your registration with the college is in good standing. As you know, it's also a condition on your certificate of registration that the member must be educated and experienced in every area in which they practice. And you can always update all your information on the member and applicant portal. So on the map, if you have any questions about this, don't hesitate to call our staff. We're here. We want to make sure that you're complying with these requirements. And so on the website, you can see there's a section about maintaining your registration. We also have what you must know about professional liability insurance and what you must know about illegal practice. These are all very helpful documents when it comes to assisting you in making sure your registration is in good standing. Number 8, keep current with changes in legislation, regulations, and other laws applicable to the practice of the profession. As you know, the provincial government amends the legislation and regulations governing the delivery of healthcare services and the practice of healthcare professionals from time to time. We recently had some changes in the HARP Act to who was able to order CT scans. We, of course, will notify you, all active members, of any changes to the RHPA, the MRIT Act, or other legislation that impacts the practice of members by email, and also will put articles in our newsletter, Insights. The easiest way to keep up to date with all this is to read the communications and email notices from the college. We only send you information that you need to know about that affects your practice. So just make sure that you're reading those email notices. And number 9, check your email regularly and respond to any written communication from the CMRITO that requires a response. So under the college's bylaws, all members are required to have an email address, and they're also required to check that email address regularly. So check your email. Make sure you're keeping up to date with the legislation. If there's any written communication from the college that requires a response, make sure you do that. We will only ask you to respond to things that are required for the college's processes. It could be an investigation, it could be a notice of a QA assessment, all those kinds of things. Just make sure that you are reading them and following up with them in a timely fashion. That's the easiest way to make sure that you're meeting all your professional accountability obligations. So that brings us to what you're required to do each year. Number one, or number 10, is to renew your registration on time. The renewal date for CMRITO members is your birthday, and notices are emailed to members 30 to 60 days before those due dates. If you haven't registered or paid your registration fee within 14 days after your birthday, then a late penalty is applied. And you want to avoid that, right? Why would you pay a late penalty because you haven't paid on time? If you don't pay within 3 months and you haven't resigned, then you are no longer legally authorized to practice. We will suspend the certificate of registration. That's required in the registration regulation and the RHPA. Members who are on leave or not currently working in Ontario may resign. That's fine, because if you're not registered, if you're not practicing, you don't need to be registered. But just make sure you reinstate before you go back to work so that you don't get into a situation where you're practicing without being registered. All this information is available on the website, and you can also contact our registration department to make sure that you're keeping up to date with all these pieces. Number 11 is to truthfully complete your annual declarations respecting conduct, QA, and compliance. So our regulations require members to complete these annual declarations to say that you understand the legislation, you're following the legislation, you're adhering to the professional misconduct regulations, all those compliance types of questions. So we ask them every year and as part of your renewal, and so you're required to answer them truthfully. If there's a change and you need to upload some documents, there is a space on the annual renewal for you to do that. And of course, knowingly giving a false answer is cause for revocation of the member's certificate of registration. So fortunately, that doesn't happen too often, but it is an important piece. You do need to answer the questions truthfully. And number 12 is to complete your QA ePortfolio every year, whether you're required to submit it for the for assessment by the QA committee or not. Every year, you must do the QA ePortfolio. And of course, that includes the QA profile, the self-assessment, and the record of continuing education and professional development. And of course, just watching this webinar and reading the What You Must Know About Professional Accountability will count towards your record of CE and PD for 22 if you do it this year, or in 2023 if you do it after January 1st. What you are required to do when the situation arises. So let's have a look at this. Number 13 is to update your information if there's a change in your name or personal or business info within 7 days after that change. So again, all this information is available on the website. And if you go to your map and look in your profile, you'll see there's a place there to update your home address, update your name in the register, update your communication information, all that information. So make sure you do that within 7 days of any change. Number 14 is to inform the college of details related to any charges, offenses, professional misconduct, and investigations. So you have to provide details of all these requirements that relate to you and occur or happen after your registration. So that could include any outstanding charge for an offense under the Criminal Code or the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, a finding of guilt for any offense, including any criminal offense and any offense related to the regulation of the practice of the profession. So it's important to provide us with that information, and the registrar and CEO will review that information. Other information you need to tell us about is if there's a finding of professional misconduct, incompetency, or incapacity. So that would mean that there's been a finding of guilt by a discipline committee or a fitness to practice committee. In Ontario, in relation to another health profession, or in another jurisdiction in relation to the profession or another health profession. So anything to do with any health profession in any jurisdiction, you need to be letting us know about that. Also, you're required to tell us if there's an investigation or a proceeding involving an allegation of professional misconduct, incompetency, or incapacity, again, in relation to our profession or any other health profession. So these are all public protection pieces that you need to let us know about. Number 15 is to comply with RHPA mandatory reporting obligations regarding sexual abuse and other provincial legislation. So, as you know, a member must file a written report to the college if you have reasonable grounds obtained in the course of your practice to believe that a patient has been sexually abused by a CMRITO member or a member of another health college. So that's an important public protection requirement, is mandatory reporting. And you can find information about that in our What You Must Know About Mandatory Reporting and also sexual abuse. There's other legislation that healthcare professionals or citizens are required to report. And if you have, one of them is if you believe there is a child in need of protection, you are required to file a report under the Child, Youth and Family Services Act. Of course, if all this happens in your facility, then often there are processes in place to make sure that it is done appropriately and in a timely fashion. Number 16 is to submit your QA ePortfolio for assessment on the request of the QA committee. So each year, although you're required to do it every year, each year the QA committee will assess about 20% of the members, and then you are notified, you get plenty of notice that you're required to submit your ePortfolio for assessment. This is a random selection by a computer program. And again, you're notified by email and through the map of the requirement. So another reason to be checking your email. The QA committee then assesses the ePortfolios to make sure that members are compliant, and most members absolutely do meet the requirements of the program. And the committee might require a member who has been deemed not to have met the requirements to complete a specified continuing education or professional development activity. They might require you to work with a mentor for a while or a peer and practice assessment. And ultimately, if a member fails to comply with the QA committee around the assessment of the QA ePortfolio, then the committee can refer that allegation to the ICR committee, the Inquiries, Complaints and Reports Committee, and they will deal with that. Here's the numbers for the 2022 QA assessments that were completed in the first quarter of the year. So this was the assessment of the 2021 portfolios at the beginning of 2022. So you can see out of 2,083 members who were required to submit their portfolios, 2,080 met that requirement. So great job there to the vast majority of members required to submit. Unfortunately, 3 were referred to the ICR committee, and the ICR committee will perform an investigation to see if the member is guilty of professional misconduct or whether we need to refer it to the discipline committee for a hearing. That's where a finding of guilt would be made. And unfortunately, some members do that, end up going that route, and there's really no need for it at all. You just need to comply and cooperate with the QA committee. They're given lots of opportunities to do that. And number 17, the last one, is to comply with a requirement or order of a committee, carry out an undertaking, or cooperate with an investigator of the college. Failure to comply with an order of a committee, or if you've agreed to do something, and failure to do that, or failure to comply with an investigator of the college, can result in further investigations and sanctions. The RHPA requires the college to consider and investigate issues related to professional misconduct, incompetence, or incapacity as part of our public protection role. And so it's unfortunate that some members make us go this route, but we certainly have the authority, not only the authority, also the obligation to follow through with any allegations of professional misconduct, incompetence, or incapacity. So you must cooperate with the college as it relates to carrying out its responsibilities under the college or under the RHPA. And of course, there is due process. So whenever an investigation is conducted, whenever a committee is considering allegations of professional misconduct or determining whether or not to make an order for a particular member, the member is provided with written notice of the process, an opportunity to submit a letter or their concerns to the committee or the regulatory process. So there is fair process that you're notified, you have an opportunity to respond, and the committee will consider that as they're making their decisions. So the easiest thing to do is to read your emails and to respond to any requests for information from the college. Further information, of course, is available in the jurisprudence program, what you must know about college complaints and professional misconduct. And as we said, you might want to look at our hearings page on our website to see the kinds of discipline hearings and the findings made in relation to this professional accountability requirement. We want to help members meet their professional accountability requirements and to practice safely. So we have a button on the homepage of our website where you can learn more. And also you can always contact us at the college around professional practice issues, registration, all those things. So we're here to help you and to be successful in your career. Here's how you contact us. And thank you all so much for your attention. I hope you found this webinar helpful. Don't forget to record it in your QA portfolio, and we'll see you next time.